thing with seniors is not knowing.
Okay, I have 4:30. I'd like to call the Policy and Personnel meeting for April 27th to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Jacobs?
Here.
Levy?
Here.
Wong?
Present.
All members are present with Wong in the boardroom.
Okay, can we have an approval of the agenda?
So move. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Can we have an approval of the minutes?
I have one concern with the minutes. So the sentence that starts, there was clarification regarding the 2015-2016 matrix, modifications that were made by previous administrators. I would like for the minutes to reflect, comma, accepted by previous board, and then this is my proposed addition, and continued by the current administration. I think that's an important piece to make sure anyone reading this minutes has a full picture of what happened.
Okay, so we have a motion for an amendment to the minutes.
I second that.
Okay. Any discussion?
So point of order, technically I didn't make a motion. I was looking for feedback.
I think that's fine, Board Member Levy. And as long as we're discussing the minutes, Ms. Shope, was I correct in that other matter regarding the dates?
Yes, you were, so I changed it from March to April for you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Shope. And if I may, Vice President Wong, just so the public is aware that you're running the meeting due to, I have asked you to run it due to my cataract surgery yesterday. It's very difficult for me to focus on things tonight when I read. So I do appreciate you running the meeting. I wanted to sneak that in there. And again, back to Board Member Levy's suggestion, I think that would be fine.
Okay, and I have no problem with that as well. So.
Perfect. So I move that we approve the minutes from the April 13th meeting with the edits recommended by Board Member Levy and Board Member Jacobs.
A second.
Okay, great. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from last meeting with the amendment, the changes that Board Member Levy had indicated there. All those in favor would indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Takes us to item 2A, which is the athletic and club activity addendum structure proposal. And for that, we have Ms. Williams, Mr. Beard, and Ms. LaPointe that are going to be presenting. And then who's going to share the, okay, somebody's already got that.
Okay, thanks. All right. Good evening, Board of Education and members of the audience. Tonight we are presenting the following objectives, slide please, to be provided as a deeper understanding of the proposed salary matrices for athletics and clubs and activities. We have Joel Beard joining us virtually, and then we have Wendy LaPointe, who will be driving our slides tonight as well. Tonight we want to share with you the historical overview of matrices, both for athletics and clubs and activities. We want to talk about the athletics matrix overview and the categorization. So basically, the formula that drives the current matrix, not the current matrix, I apologize, the proposed matrices. I want to differentiate between what are district-issued addendums that are fixed amounts through Fund 10 and title funds. We want to talk about clubs and activities, and then we want to finalize the presentation with our recommendations of a proposed matrix for athletics and clubs and activities. So in my research, in regards to athletic addendums, what we had found is that in 2015 and 2016 was the last board-approved matrix for athletics. In 2017 and 2018, there was work created for athletic addendums. However, that matrix was never board-approved. Since 2015 and 2016, there have been exceptions made to that matrix, meaning the 2015 and the 2016 matrix, and those were brought forward to the board for approval. And since then, HR and Finance was using the 2015 and the 2016 matrix with those board-approved exceptions that were made in the past. I'm going to turn
With the proposal, oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I was going to turn it over to you, Joel, so you could talk about the principles.
Yes, thank you, Tanya. With the proposed athletic matrix, each coach is put into a group, and within that group, we use 4 criteria to place each sport into a certain section of that matrix. So, and that's based off of in-season length of the sport, the number of games during a season, also aligning with other schools within our conference and surrounding areas, and the supervisory responsibilities of the head coach versus an assistant coach, and the other responsibilities of the head coach that comes with that position. The matrix is based off a percentage of the teacher base pay of $43,000. This is the first salary step on the professional educator's matrix. As a coach, you will fall into one of these 3 categories, and I'm going to walk you through those 3 categories right now and how they're broken down. The first part, there's 3 categories here. They're based off the number of hours a coach puts in a day and the number of days in a week. You know, so the number of days varies from 5 to 6 and 2 to 3 hours a day. We're using the curriculum rate of $23 per hour to start that process of breaking it down. As you can see, Group 1 turns out to be $414 a day or a week, and Group 2 is $276 a week, and Group 3 would be $230 a week if you were to break it down this way. This helped us create a range for each group, and then we could take the average number of weeks for each group of sports and aligning them with the other schools in our conference. And this is an example of that rate based off the $43,000 teacher starting pay. So we created our percentages, and this will be an example of our head coach's rate or range and how they are going to be paid. So if you could click on the matrix there, Ms. LaPointe, there you go. You can scroll up there. All right, so you would see our athletic coaches here. You can make that a little bit bigger, yeah, or smaller. Okay, so you could see the range of coaches and coaching positions that we have. So if we were looking at the beginning there, a baseball coach in step 1, first year of experience, would make $3,311, and they will increase that step as they move along with experience up to 7+ years, and then they would be locked in there at 7+ years. And we continue that throughout the other sports, and everyone is uniform in how they approach each step and how we got to the percentages of where they are on that scale. So the sports are grouped together. As far as Group 1, that's where we put our head coaches. Group 2 is where we put our assistant coaches and our activities. And then Group 3 will be our intermediate coaches and our club advisors. So go
Mr.
ahead to
Beard,
the
can I
next
chime
slide
in for a
there.
second?
Yes, go ahead.
Joel, can you share with them the difference with this matrix that we're showing versus the one that was uploaded to board docs?
Yes, I
Okay,
apologize
thank
for
you.
that. The one that was uploaded to board docs, we had to make some adjustments as far as the steps are concerned. We wanted to be consistent with our current addendum scale as far as experience is concerned, and also the BEA agreement that was in place from, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Williams, 2015-16. So we left it, we wanted to move it back to 7 years of experience to align with that agreement.
So I'll actually clarify that. So the last BEA agreement from 2007 to 2011 had the 5 steps with 7+ years being the last salary step. And so that carried on over from 2015 and 2016 in that board-approved matrix. And even the work that was done in 2017, 2018, that was never board-approved, still used the same salary steps. So we wanted to be consistent with those previous documents that were created.
Thank you.
So I want to talk about the district-issued addendums, and these are really academic-driven. They're also district-issued with fixed amounts. They're funded from Fund 10 and Title funds, and they're not really matrix-driven. They're not part of the clubs and activities matrix that we're proposing tonight because of the fact that they're district-issued. Examples of district-issued addendums that you would see on an Exhibit B when we present that as a recommendation form would be noon supervision, the bilingual program liaison, the mentoring program, and then department chairs, both at the district level and at the school levels.
Historically, clubs and activities and addendums are not matrix-driven, but they're allocated as a fixed amount. And with this new addendum, we would like to be uniform through our club advisors and all our extracurricular activities. So we decided to put them on that matrix, on this matrix. And the club and activity addendums include the following list that you see here: art club, destination imagination in our intermediate schools, junior honor society, and you can see the list. So there's a range of those schools or those clubs and activities at the high school, the intermediate, and in the elementary. The compensation for these positions in clubs and activities are same mentality within athletics, in that we applying a range to their experiences and creating a scale for them, and using their experience to place the individual within the scale so that it is consistent throughout both athletically and through our clubs and activities. We still use the teacher base pay of $43,000. And if we were to increase that $43,000 at a district level, then the athletic addendums across the board would increase that percentage, just that little bit across the board. So it would be consistent throughout the district of, if we increase the teacher pay, the athletic addendum would increase slightly along with it. So if you go ahead, Ms. LaPointe, you can click on the link there so we can show an example of the clubs and addendums or clubs and activities. Just a quick shot here of the activities and what that all entails. You can see the activities: band, jazz band, concert band, choir, orchestra. All of those activities are on the same scale and uniform together. If you scroll down just a little bit, Ms. LaPointe, you'll see the same thing for the club advisors and from the high school, and the club advisors for intermediate and elementary.
Do you want to entertain questions now, or would you prefer to at the end?
We actually have one more slide, and if we can get through that one slide that talks about recommendations, we can open it up for questions then.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, so tonight, our overall matrix proposal is as follows. We recommend approval of the proposed athletic and clubs and activities matrices to be effective July 1st of 2021. At this time, we have paid out about 80% of this year's addendums under the 2015 and 2016 matrix, with 20% yet to be paid out. We're recommending that we pay out the remainder of the addendums through June 30th of 2021. So this allows us to communicate to our staff. We can train them and educate them on the new addendum and matrix structure. This also allows anyone that's financially impacted to make an informed decision to continue on with either a club or activity and or an athletic season that they may coach for. It also allows for our building administrators to retain our current coaches and advisors, but also recruit new coaches and advisors with the board-approved, documented, and what we believe an equitable pay practice moving forward. And with that, I have Joel here to answer questions. I have Wendy from a finance perspective, and then myself.
Okay, first of all, Ms. Jacobs, Board Member Jacobs, you have a question?
Yes, I have a couple, thank you. My first question, and please forgive my ignorance in this matter, I'm not a sports lady. I saw that we pay out 6 days a week. What sports happen other than football? Why, is that a consistent, Mr. Beard? Well, or whomever would like to answer it. Why, so we're paying a coach for 6 days a week for weeks at a time? Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, it's just a matter of calculating the hours and the time that they put in during the course of a week while they're in season. So a lot of our sports have activities on Saturdays.
Okay.
We have golf outing or golf meeting, cross country during the fall, volleyball during the fall, all kinds of activities on Saturdays. So that's where a 6-day week was counted for a coach at the high school, and 5 days were counted for an intermediate coach who does not have any weekend activities.
So Mr. Beard, is that so every week you're saying there's 6 days a week for those coaches?
For the most part, yes. They're either practicing or they have events those days.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And my other question is in regards to the elementary clubs and activities. It's since I've been out for a number of years now, and I'm not sure who would answer this question. I know that it used to be part BEA agreement. Is it still that if, say, I do drama at the elementary level, I have first dibs on it, even if I'm not doing a good job, and I've done it for 3 years, and I go up on the pay scale every year. Is that still in place?
So I think you're probably referencing a staffing situation, Board Member Jacobs, and so...
The addendums, Tanya, yeah.
Yeah, so typically what happens is somebody carries over from year to year if they're already in that assignment. If that position or activity was to open it up, the expectation is that our building leaders would provide an equitable way for their staff to express interest in that position. If they have more than one person interested in that position, they should be doing some sort of interviewing or some sort of practice that provides equity in a selection process.
Thank you. That makes me feel a lot better because, and on the whole, the majority of the staff, in my experience before, were doing a great job. But it was, if I remember correctly, it was written in the BEA language that every once in a while you'd have an outlier that perhaps wasn't doing such a great job, and with what you've explained, that makes it much more equitable. So I appreciate that, and those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Board Member Levy?
So a couple of questions. First of all, I love the matrix. Thank you for putting this together. It's clear to read and understand. It looks completely fair and reproducible. So I'm very excited about the future matrix. I do have a question. Excuse me. So in the slideshow under principles for athletic matrix, you have based on the length of season of the sport, the number of the games, that list. Are those things already factored into the matrix with the purple heading that has the amounts and years of experience?
Yes, those are already factored into the matrix. So, yes, so like, for example, basketball has a longer season than tennis, so those are incorporated in where they fall on the scale. So yes, they're already incorporated into that. And that's that's determined how they fall.
Perfect. That is my only question. I was hoping that the answer was yes, because that means that everything is easily explained, which I appreciate. Vice President Wong, I just have a couple comments to the committee. One, I think that this should be, if there is a motion to approve this onto the full board, that should not happen this evening, but instead that should happen for May 11th. And the reason I say that is that it's my understanding, someone please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the attachments that we were able to review were not made available to the public. And I don't think that it's fair for the board to take action, the full board, to take action on a topic that the public has not had access to the information that we've had access to. And the reason for that is, let's say as a community member, I read the presentation and I had questions or concerns, then I would be able to come down to the meeting or email and voice my concern through public comment. If I didn't have access to the presentation that we had access to, I'm not able to do that. And again, I don't think it's fair for the board to move on something that the public doesn't have a full opportunity to participate in.
And I certainly understand that. I wouldn't disagree. I don't think that there's any rush. We pushed it out. We've let it go this far. I think that having the public have a good look at this is a wise decision, and there's been a lot of work put into this, and we appreciate that. So let's make sure it's well thought out and making a good decision.
And the only reason I bring it up is because it is listed on the regular board meeting for this evening.
Okay. We can address that.
Thank you.
Yep. I do have a couple of questions. One is, Mr. Beard, when I look at this, and I'm looking at the spreadsheet here where it says coaches pay, and maybe I was misinterpreting this, but it shows the number of weeks. It shows the season, the start date, the ending date, and the number of weeks. So we can see here that the girls' basketball and the boys' basketball is 16 weeks, and going all the way to football's 11 weeks, and baseball's 11 weeks, and so on. And then on the next worksheet, it gets into the pay scale, and I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. And it says Group 1, it says $414 a week based upon that period of time, and then it multiplies it out, and it comes up with the 13.48, which is fine. But my question is how does this pertain then to the weeks for each of the sport? Because that doesn't coincide, and maybe I'm just mixing stuff up here, because not all the sports have the same number of weeks. So therefore,
Correct.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just going to say, so we have basketball, which is 16 weeks, and if you do the multiplication on that, it's going to come up to more than 13.48%, and football would be under that. Can you explain that, please?
Yes, I can explain that. The weeks that you see on that section was used to get us to a scale, to create a scale of numbers. All right. And for the sports, it's, if you can see, like, our sports start from 8 weeks to 14 weeks. So I just started from 8 to 14, and just to create a scale. And it gave us the percentages. The first slide, or the first section that you see where the number of weeks for the season of each sport is taken into account of where they are placed and where they start to create a range for that sport. So, for example, basketball starts at 8.67%. Baseball would start at 7.70%, and golf would start at 6.74%, and then they work their ways up towards those up the scale that way. The weeks were taken into account to place those sports in the different places they start on that scale. So and also taken in that is comparables with the other schools that are in our conference. Does that help answer your question?
Maybe I'm just reading this a whole different way. I'm just looking at saying, okay, if we look at and I'm looking at the attachment, so it's the attachment there. So if you go down in that, I think it's on the next page or two.
Oh, the link.
Yeah, the proposed the matrix.
Yeah, if you go into the spreadsheet.
There you go.
And then go over to pay scale?
Yep, exactly. And you have the example there. And I just want to kind of reference that because it says, okay, 414 times 14 weeks is 43,000, or divided by 43 is the 13.48.
Correct. And that is used to create our percentage of 13.48, and it gives us a rate of 57.96 based off of 14 weeks of work. So that's what it's based off of to give us a range. And therefore, when we created the range of numbers, the rates, I went back to the sports, which would be the sport week counts, and tried to group our sports together so that we could take into account the number of activities or events that they have, the responsibilities each head coach would have. All those things would come into account to place them on this scale, and that's where they're grouped together, and then they grow together as well as far as experience is concerned. So what you see right here were the numbers to help us, the weeks were used to help us create a range and a rate to place our coaches on, not basically on what the season actually is.
Okay. And maybe I just need to read this through a little bit more. I think I'm overthinking it. So I guess I'm just looking at it because, like with football, if you took that times 11 weeks, you're going to come up with a number that's going to be far less. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is that he used those the three different categories to kind of get averages so that we didn't have a different percentage for every sport. He got averages and ranges. Does that help make sense?
Okay, yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I just like when I was reading through, because when you threw the example out there on the pay scale one, where it shows the 414 times 14 weeks divided by 43,000 comes up to the 13.48, it lines perfectly with your little chart there. But if you do the same thing for football or for basketball, the numbers are going to look different.
Yeah, he's not doing a percentage for each sport because the number of weeks in the season would be different for each one. So he's making ranges based on averages.
Okay. I do have another actually, it's more of a comment, and I don't know if this is the right area or not, and I guess somebody call me out on it if it is, but I like the work that was done here, and I think it was long overdue. I think that one thing that, if it's possible, once this gets to, and I guess, like I said, whether it comes back to us through the full board, is it possible to potentially put some stopgaps in place so that we prevent any type of adjustments from ever happening without it being properly vetted through the entire board and through the public? And I think this is more of a policy issue on our end.
Okay, and I think if I can comment on that as well. So what makes this tool sustainable is the fact that if the first salary cell in the professional educator salary matrix increases, This is tied to that. Also, that curriculum rate of $23 an hour, if that was to change, some of the formulas change as well. So I think we would need an understanding from the board if and when that professional educator matrix changes, do you want us to bring this matrix back for approval at that time as well?
I would jump in and add to that the responsibility of the board is to approve addendums and salaries, and so the fact that the practice got loosened and passed changes, no one questioned those addendum changes as related to the matrix. So moving forward, we would stick with this process. So if approved, the matrix becomes the driving force. If we wanted to make any changes to addendums, we would have to make those changes into the matrix and reapprove the whole matrix as a matter of practice, which has been the process that should have been followed as past practice. So
Right, but it got sidetracked along the way.
policy wasn't followed.
Right, okay. Okay. Are there any other questions from board members? Let's see, I hit. What's that?
Board Vice President Wong, I just wanted to compliment, and I apologize for not doing so before when I spoke earlier. I want to compliment everyone who worked on this. I think this is really great, and obviously a lot of time and effort went into it. And I think going forward, this is going to make things much more equitable. And thank you again for all your hard work, everybody.
Board Member Levy?
Nope, I found my answer. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Kieser?
I also want to say thank you to the team for doing a lot of good work here and getting this prepared for the presentation. I also just wanted to follow up on the concern that is out there in terms of presenting information. Our board policy talks about the postings and the information needed to be presented to the committee and to the board for their review. And so I just want to make sure that the community is aware that we are well within state law around open meetings, and that we are within our board policy for posting and information. That being said, if the committee feels that they want to take extra time, that is totally within the scope of the committee and then the full board. So I just wanted to make sure that the community realized and knows that we've been following policy and state law the entire time with our practice. Although it has changed from the past, we have been following. And I have every inquiry I've taken it to our district council to vet the inquiry, and he has consistently said that we've been following policy and law.
Okay, thank you for that. Board Member Levy?
Thank you. So I want to be very clear about my concern. Just because something is not illegal does not mean that you should not do it. And since the attachments were prepared, they were distributed to the board, I would love to hear an explanation for why they weren't available for the public to review. Because just like the scenario I described earlier, if we push this to the full board tonight and the full board takes action, then that circumvents the public's ability to be fully informed and to voice their comments, concerns, praise, etc. I believe the policy you're referring to is policy 171.2, agenda preparation and dissemination. Towards the end of that policy, it says the agenda and agenda-related documents shall then be posted on the district website on board docs 4 days prior to the regularly scheduled business or special meeting. So if we are having difficulty with semantics, maybe policy and personnel needs to review that and make sure it's clear that it should be publicly posted. But given the opportunity to share information to the community, I am alarmed that it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, the decision was made, instead of making this public, to call counsel and find out if it's okay to not make it public. And let's just be clear, our board and our community has trust issues. We have transparency issues. So to not make this public, I would really like to understand why that decision was made.
The decision was made because the interest is for the board to be fully informed and make a fully informed decision. The public is aware of the issues that are being discussed at the board level. I had conversations with Board President Miller before making decisions to move our attachments so that the board would be able to see it and that the public would be able to see it before the board meeting and committee meetings actually were being heard. And when inquiries were asked, are we following policy and state statute, I have consistently gone back to our district council to review those questions and do that. The concern has been that there have been situations in the past this year where agenda items have been altered, changed, and even removed because of public concern over the conversation. So those conversations never made it to the full board for the full board to address and have conversations of the issue. So in part, I view my role in working in this partnership to make sure that the full board is fully informed and that the issues do get to the board for conversation and not be influenced beyond that. So my allegiance is to the district and to the board and making sure the board is fully informed. That being said, Board President Miller and I had a conversation earlier this week, yesterday afternoon, in which she is reconsidering that my recommendation, and that is something that may change moving forward into the future.
I will just say this and then yield the floor to whoever wants to address it. Just because something is not illegal does not mean that we shouldn't do it. And if I was not a board member and just Janice Q Public, my question would be, what are you hiding? And not just to you specifically, Dr. Kieser, but what are we hiding? If we're waiting to the last minute to post things publicly, people have lives, people have responsibilities. We should give them as much time as possible. If we are generating excellent ideas, we should be happy and excited to share that with the public and welcome their feedback.
And I appreciate your comments and your concerns, and I would say I am not hiding anything. I feel the public is informed on what the issues and the conversations are, and my perspective and my view has been to work with the board president to share my ideas and my thoughts. She okayed this course of action, and now she's reconsidering it because of conversations that have come up in the community. So I feel like I have not been hiding anything. I feel like I've been doing the work of the district and the work of the board without trying to be evasive or secretive with anything. And I would argue the procedures and practices we hold here in Beloit far exceed anything that I am aware of, and I would challenge anyone to say that they have a more transparent process than what we do here.
Board Member Jacobs.
Thank you. With the amount of time that we have spent on this, I personally feel that the public has had time for input, and I think that this has gone on long enough, and I feel that I support Dr. Kieser and the administration, and I personally would feel fine with making a motion, if I may, at this time to approve the matrix and pass it on to the full board.
Just a question for clarification, to pass it on to the full board when? Because yes, we have been discussing this for multiple months, but the matrix was just made public. I don't know, I guess Dr. Kieser would have to answer that.
A motion passing on to the full board without a specific date would just move to the next date in which it's agendized, so that would be tonight's consent agenda.
Dr.
No, the
Kieser.
question- I
I'm sorry.
apologize.
Go ahead,
The
board
question
member.
for you, Dr. Kieser, was when was this matrix made available to the public?
It was made available to the attachments were made available on Monday. The posting of the board report was last Wednesday.
So yesterday?
The attachments yesterday, but the public was informed of the content and the substance of the conversation tonight last Wednesday.
Thank you so much.
So I perhaps I need to amend my motion by saying that I would move to approve the matrix to go to the full board today. Excuse me, I hit my mute button.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Board Member Jacobs, though, that motion is to push the board meeting tonight, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I can second that, correct? Correct. I will second that. So we have a motion on the table, second, discussion.
I would just say that the motion is to move the conversation to the full board, so there hasn't been a motion for approval. That motion would have to come at the discussion tonight at the full board.
Thank you for that clarification, Dr. Kieser.
That just brought up a question for me. Typically, things are approved at committee level to move them on to the full board. And I was under the impression, Board Member Jacobs, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the intent of your motion was to approve this through committee and move it on to the full board for this evening. Is that accurate?
Actually, yes, Board Member Levy. So now that there's a question back to Dr. Kieser for me. So Dr. Kieser, was it your intent to move it to the full board for approval or to the consent, or excuse me, for approval to the consent agenda tonight, or to have a discussion with the full board?
The motion that was put in the board report was to approve the matrices to be put into effect July 1st, 2021.
So then if my original motion stands, then it would go, just correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, then it would go to the full board to the consent agenda tonight so that it would go into effect in July, correct?
It's already listed on the consent agenda for this evening.
Correct. I would just say that you did not put a date for the approval of the matrices to be put into effect.
Point of order. What I heard Board Member Jacobs say was that she wanted to move approval of the matrix to the full Board of Education. That's what I heard her to say. And
Good.
then she added later, today.
And so to me, is it move approval for it to begin today if the full board approves, or to be approved on July 1st, 2021, as it is written in the board report?
I see where you're coming from. Okay, so my intention was to move it to the full board for approval with the intention that it would take place July 1st, you said, Dr. Kieser?
Correct.
Yes, that was my intent with the motion.
Thank you.
So are we okay with that motion then? Michelle?
Yes, the today was in response to Board Member Levy's question of when was it going to the full board?
For full board for
And she
approval.
responded today.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion on the table. We have a second. I'll just make a brief comment. I agree as well. I think we've gone through this enough. I think that there's been a lot of hard work done with this, and I think that it's time to move past this at this point. I understand the concern about transparency. I don't think that this has been out there for quite a while. We've been working on this for, I don't know, a couple of months now. I mean, obviously to the extent of what you've done in the last 2 weeks. So we appreciate the work that's been put forth. I don't think that we are in any way, shape, or form trying to hide anything from this. We've all looked at this ourselves over the last, and we are the board. It's our job to make the approval of this. So if there's concerns that will come forward, I guess they will come forward. But I would say, with that being said, let's see. Hopefully I have my glasses on. Board Member Levy, did you have another comment there?
Just very briefly, I just want to make sure in our discussion of this current motion that we're not conflating the discussion that has been had for the current addendums for coaches, because we're not even addressing that. The work of this future addendum, we've literally been discussing this for 2 weeks. This isn't the discussion we've been having for multiple months. So I just wanted to be clear about that we're not conflating the two issues.
Okay, all those in favor of moving this of approving the matrix for approval to the full board this evening to be effective on July 1st, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, motion carries 2-1. So let's move on to item 3A, personnel items. We have the employee rec A and B. Is there a reason to go into closed session? Board Member Levy?
Thank you. I can't answer that first question until I get an answer to my first question. So I noticed an exhibit. Well, first let me back up. I love that the inclusion of the interview panel diversity report is there under executive content. I absolutely love it. Thank you for listening to us and including that information. So my first question is there a way to make that demographic information of the candidate pool public without identifying individuals? Because I think that would be a great thing for the public to see. So there is confidence that we are making an earnest effort to make sure our candidate pools are diverse, and also our hiring and review panels are diverse. So that's my first question.
Okay, so let me try to address that. And I respect that. I think those are great thoughts. I want to be transparent with all of our hiring practices as well. I want to provide confidence that HR is doing things equitably so we can regain the trust that we have within the district. What I would like to do is explore that idea with legal, just to make sure that we're not doing anything that may be viewed I don't know, maybe in an unethical manner. I don't think it would be, but if you would just give us an opportunity to explore that, that would be really helpful for us.
Absolutely. That makes complete sense, and I appreciate your willingness to look into that. That is
Sure.
great. So my next question, and the answer to this will kind of determine if we need to go into closed session or can remain in open. I noticed that under the long-term special ed sub, the pay is $175 per day. I thought it was $150 for long-term subs, but I could completely be wrong. So I just wanted clarification on that. And in the notes, it said that the individual was a previous para. So I just wanted to make sure that the person in the role has acquired a professional educator license.
Missy Beavers is going to help us answer that. She's coming up to the podium.
Good evening. The individual is currently one of our UW-SET residents who is working towards licensure, has a bachelor's, and has now secured a substitute teaching license, which is needed to perform the roles of that position.
Perfect. And the pay, like the standard long-term educator pay is $175 a day. I just wanted to make sure that that was accurate.
We're looking that up. It feels right. I know we had proposed those changes last fall. However, we haven't had a lot of long-term subs come across, so I just want to make sure we're providing accurate information. Okay.
And then my final question on that is there a pay difference between someone who is in a long-term sub position and someone who is in a long-term teacher position? Is that a difference? And then my final kind of clarification is someone who does not have a professional educator license is still eligible to serve in the role long-term as an educator. Like that's, everything's on par with DPI requirements, et cetera, for that long-term position?
Okay, so I do want to, I want to provide you the information about the long-term sub rate. That is $175 in a professional educator role that was board approved last fall when we proposed all of our new sub rates. I think I need some clarification on the question regarding the long-term sub versus long-term teacher. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're trying to substantiate. And then you also
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And I just took the verbiage from the document, and it says long-term special education teacher. And I'm just wondering, is that different from a long-term sub position, or are those one and the same?
It is the same.
Okay. So as a sub, I don't have to have a professional educator license. I just have to have a sub license. But to be a long-term special education teacher, you're saying you still don't have to have that professional educator license. A sub license will suffice. That's correct?
So in order to substitute as a professional educator, you have to have a bachelor's degree and able to get the provisional or emergency license from DPI. And so with special ed, you would also be required to get that special ed provisional license.
So I just want to make sure we're on the same page. The person has an emergency professional educator license. This is separate from a subbing license.
Okay.
Correct?
I'm going to have Missy Beavers come up from special ed who can provide that clarification for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
So this is a long-term sub position through the remainder of the year. It's no different than a long-term sub position in any other content area. A sub must hold a substitute license through DPI. It doesn't matter what content area you are in. If this individual was offered a limited term contract, which is different than a substitute position, then this individual would need to hold an emergency license or a provisional 1-year license, which is different and carries different credentials than a substitute license.
Perfect. That's the clarification I was looking for. Thank you so much.
Any other questions from board members?
So I'm good on Exhibit A. For Exhibit B, my concern is, so I'm just going to say it. No one has fixed the mess. Like, we've identified the mess, but no one has fixed the mess. And I'm curious as to why, for example, the head football coach position was initially, we were being asked to approve that at $10,000, and now it's changed to $8,000. But the question that I have now been asked for multiple months of how did we arrive at these numbers, and I appreciate the transparency at our last meeting that says it was based off of the 2015 matrix that was board approved, but then changes were made, and then those changes just continued. Like, we still haven't, am I understanding clearly that we agree that these numbers are not necessarily fair or were generated in a board-approved manner, but the request is still that we approve them and then transition into the new proposed matrix? I just want to be clear with what the request is of this committee.
So in our proposal from earlier tonight, what we had talked about was the proposed matrices would be effective July 1st. This would allow us to pay out any remaining addendums through June 30th, and that does include the staff that we have included on Exhibit B. It also allows us a chance to educate people, when we look at specifically the football coach, and this is one that, you know, we've talked about a number of times, we brought this one to the board with a $10,000 addendum based on what had been past practice from the 2015-16 matrix. So when that was denied the first time, we went back to the drawing board and we looked at what was previously approved for some of the addendums as a head coach. And we looked at what was approved for I believe, the basketball coach that was approved at $8,000. So we aligned the head football coach with them in hopes that that would be approved and be viewed, for lack of a better term, maybe more equitable, even though we know that there was work that needed to be done on these matrices. So that is an example of why we decreased that, because we wanted to make sure that the person was getting compensated for the work that they've been currently doing. Down below, you'll see that there's several staff members listed for noon supervision and mentoring and PBIS. Those are those district-issued addendums. So those aren't matrix-driven. Those are those fixed amounts. So I'm hoping that might provide some clarification.
Go ahead, Board Member Levy.
Yes, thank you for making that final point. I'm completely fine with the extracurricular addendas and approving those. Here is my concern. The way the new matrix is structured, it's reproducible, it's fair, it's upfront. I am very uncomfortable with us acknowledging that the current numbers we have for coaches are not reproducible, they're not upfront. We can't go to a matrix and say, yep, this is what this number should be. And just shifting numbers around kind of highlights that point for me. from my position, we don't know what these numbers should be. We just have numbers in front of us. And it's just not something that I'm comfortable with supporting.
I have a question regarding the previous addendums, specifically the basketball position. Is that addendum was approved by this board earlier in the year, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I just want to get clarification on that because, yeah. Dr. Keiser, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say that completely understand, and if we were having this conversation back in September prior to approving any addendums, we would be, I think, in a much different position I know we would be in a different position as an administration, saying that approval of the new matrices immediately to be paid out in this year would be appropriate. Seeing how that we have the majority of the addendums already been paid out, individuals who were and are expecting addendums looked forward and saw that this is what they were going to be expected, and to change that now for the remainder of the addendums to be paid out, if we were to adjust the motion and say the new matrices were to be approved and implemented immediately, would create a situation in which some individuals would, their pay would change, and someone along the line, whether it was someone who was already paid out on an addendum and that addendum would have changed they would have gotten more money or less money, someone would be coming out and filing a grievance against that. That's why the recommendation the way it is it's not ideal, but it is the right thing to do, to pay out the addendums based on what they were expecting this year, knowing that we have a better system coming for the 21-22 school year. So in that is the administration's ask of this committee, is to approve Exhibit B and the remainder of the addendums for the 2021 school year based on what the individuals were expecting, knowing that this is the last year that's going to happen.
Board Member Jacobs?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the employment recommendations, both Exhibits A and B, to the full board.
I would ask that you separate those out. I am able to support Exhibit A. I am even able to support Exhibit B, extracurricular, but I'm not able to support the entirety of Exhibit B, but completely, however you want to put the motion, I'm fine with.
Board Member Jacobs?
I'd like to keep the motion as is. And Board Member Levy, I do understand where you're coming from, absolutely. But I think that we need to take our lumps at this time and move the process forward, knowing that we're going to be in a better place next year. And I feel that it's somewhat dishonorable to say to an employee that's already signed off on addendums that, hey, we messed up and now we want to go back and fix it. I don't think it's fair to that individual. And that's why I'm make the motion to move forward with Exhibits A and B, knowing that in the future this will not happen again.
I will second that motion. Okay, any further discussion?
Yes, the only point that I will say is that I do hope that we take the learning from this, and that when the administration brings items to the board, It's not just because that was status quo and how things were done. The things that come before the board, we understand what is coming before the board and why it's being brought before the board, because that's how we got into this. When we saw the addendums, there were no red flags, and we trusted that the administration had a reasonable computation for how these amounts were coming up with. And then when there were red flags, it took us 2 months to come to the resolution of, yeah, this wasn't done correctly. So I just hope that we're able to look at this clearly and capture the learnings so we can be better across the board moving forward.
Board Member Jacobs? I would concur with your comments, Board Member Levy. I think it's a good point. Excellent point. I think that we also need to look at how we've treated people this year, and we did sign off on the addendums earlier in the year without raising any flags at that point in time. But regardless, I think hopefully we can move forward from this, and like you said, learn some valuable lessons from this.
Board Member Wong, I was speaking. I'm so sorry, and I was muted. May I speak?
Go ahead.
I concur with both what you and Board Member Levy said, but I think we need to allow a little grace with administration. This fall, we had a lot of new people in administrative roles. Dr. Kieser was still technically the interim. We had COVID. We had a lot of stuff coming at us fast and furious. So I don't want to sound like the board, well, like I can only speak for myself, but I don't feel that anyone did anything intentionally wrong. I think sometimes stuff happens, and I do believe that we will move forward with the learning curve. Thank you.
Dr. Kieser, did you have?
No, I would just echo the same sentiments. This is a learning process. It is not, as I said, it's not the ideal. It's not how we would want to run things. It's the situation we found ourselves in. But a lot of learning has gone in there through this process, and I definitely have some lifts in front of me as far as turning over more rocks.
Okay, so with that being said, we have a motion on the table in a second to move approval to recommend the personnel employment recommendations, Exhibit A and Exhibit B, to the full board for approval. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, motion carries 2-1. And that takes us through to the policies for first reading. And 4A, we have Attorney Love with us this evening. Thanks you for joining us. And we are in policy 522.6, employee anti-harassment.
Yes, and what you have there is the changes that had already been discussed have been incorporated. So moving the definitions up, that's why you don't see a lot of color above on the first page or on before you get to the sexual harassment issue. We left off with that last time. The previous language defined sexual harassment to be sexually oriented conduct that hold on, let me put that policy in front of me, that would unreasonably interfere with another's ability to function. That was derived from the legal definition. We had discussion about sexually oriented conduct being inappropriate. And what I've done is I modified the language so we begin with recognition of the fact that conduct would be inappropriate. So sexually oriented conduct is inappropriate in the district. But then goes on and says sexual harassment means engaging in this conduct. And then I've adopted the three provisions that you have in your general harassment, because that is the full legal definition. So, and then delete the language about unreasonable interference because we've now incorporated it above. So let's start with that paragraph if we could.
Questions or comments from board member or committee members?
I will just say thank you, Attorney Love. I could not make this make sense the last time we met, and I appreciate that opener that you put and then the 3 points of clarification. So thank you for that.
And I also agree with Board Member Levy. Thank you, Attorney Love.
You're welcome. Okay, so then let's move on. The next paragraph that you see has been inserted is just a recognition in the policy that employees have and supervisors have a duty to report harassment or bullying that occurs. That's in the general, it's been in the policy, but we wanted to reinforce that there is that obligation on the part of employees and supervisors that if you see harassment, you need to come forward and report it. Questions? The next paragraph, I think we previously discussed this. It was a very detailed definition or adopting all of the protected classes. We've replaced that by simply saying protected classes as recognized under state and federal law. And then recommended that the more detailed identification be included in the employee handbook. Then the last sentence, I think, is not really necessary. That it goes on and explains that it can occur between employee to employee, employee to student, and so on. That's not really necessary as a point of clarification because we talked earlier about anyone can bring a claim of harassment.
Vice President Wong, for this portion of the meeting, are you okay since it's just mainly the four of us if we just unmute, or do you still want us to put the question mark in the dialogue box?
No, go ahead and speak freely. I think it'll save time and we don't.
Perfect. I don't remember the exact verbiage, but however we agreed to reference the employee handbook while making it clear that if something changes in there, it does not trump policy. I think that would be appropriate for this section where you have the comments in green about the handbook.
So just so I'm clear, what you would like is where we say harassment based on protected classes recognized by state and federal law, we could add language that says the protected classes will be detailed in the employee handbook.
No, I don't even. I like streamline and as efficient as possible so it's clear. I am fine with everything that you did the line through and just replace that with protected classes recognized by state and federal law. I think that's perfect. But under everything that's crossed out in red, it says recommend adding to employee handbook. I'm just saying that at the bottom, if we reference the employee handbook for this information that's going, if they decide to include it there, that we should post it. And again, I apologize, I don't have the verbiage, but to know that this is a valuable link, but it does not supersede the policy that it's included in. Does that make sense?
Yes, you're talking about below where it says cross-references?
Yep.
Okay. And then the next paragraph is referencing that allegations of harassment will be investigated in accordance with Policy 511, which is the more detailed explanation of the actual investigation process. That's where the investigation process is contained. So we simply reference that you look to that policy for the investigation process. And then it says that any violation will result in appropriate action. I think I just went down to the bottom of the page. That stops the harassment, prevents a recurrence, and remedies the effects, which is what the legal requirement is. And then we've added a reference that, because it's part of the law as well, is that there will be no retaliation for bringing a complaint or participating in any investigation.
Any questions or comments? Okay, carry on. I think that's the end of it. So with the adjustments there, do we have any a motion?
I move that with the suggestions from Attorney Love that we forward policy 522.6 employee anti-harassment to the full board.
For first reading?
For first reading. Yes, sorry, for first reading.
Second.
Point of order. Can I just point out that we will also be renumbering it so that it matches our numbering system better? I have that in the suggested motion.
Renumbering it to 522.3?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm sorry, both of you are a bit muffled. What was the number in the policy? It's not 522.6?
It's going to be renumbered. It's in the board docs under the recommended action to be renumbered to 522.3.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion to move to recommend to the full board approval of revisions and layovers on policy 522.6 to be renumbered to 522.3 for first reading. All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
I'm having a difficult time hearing as well. It's pretty muffled, but aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, that takes us to policy 511, affirmative action and equal opportunity employment.
Okay, so we had also started reviewing this policy some time back, and so some of the first change that you see, I think, had already been discussed. But this is the policy on affirmative action and equal opportunity employment, and includes the investigation process that was referenced in the policy that was just reviewed. In the paragraph that has the first changes, we've added veterans because they are specifically referenced as an affirmative action group. The provision that the superintendent or designee will report to the board their efforts to address underutilization quarterly. Then there's this comment on it would be helpful to include how this statement impacts how the Board of Education reviews employment recommendations. And so I'm not sure there's no initial indicating to raise that issue, but.
Attorney Love, I believe the conversations have started to manifest themselves into action in terms of providing quarterly updates around our staffing and retention, as well as suggestions around reporting out the diversity of our interview panels and so forth. So if committee members, if I'm remembering correctly, that those are some of the outcomes that we were hoping for from that comment.
Yes, I definitely agree with you, Dr. Kieser. Attorney Love, so here's what I want to accomplish, and you tell me the best and legal way to do that. I don't want to make no pressure. I don't want to make our policies overly cumbersome. Like I said, I want them to be efficient, streamlined, etc. But I do think it's important, the same way we reference people in some cases to the employee handbook, if we had like diversity SOPs, so diversity standard operating procedures that we could reference people to throughout our policy, I think that would be very helpful. So what Dr. Kieser just brought up with how we are reporting the diversity of not only our candidate pool, but our hiring team. Like once we establish diversity SOPs, I would like to have those linked to policy, but not necessarily spelling everything out in policy in case there are tweaks and adjustments, because this would be something that's new for the district.
So what you could do, because those are not all developed at this point in time, but you may have some practices already in place on diversity, is if you add a sentence that says, is the expectation that employment actions will be handled in accordance with any existing diversity SOPs or policies. That way it addresses that your expectation is that they're going to follow whatever you've currently got in place, and then anything that you're going to be developing in the future, they're going to be following those. And then you could put in your reference section at the bottom of the policy the diversity SOPs.
I like that. Is it wrong to add in a thing that we want to exist but doesn't yet exist?
Well,
or I know John is going to fall off his seat, so my apologies, John. Should we hold this and keep being productive with other policies until we flesh that out? What would be your recommendation? Because I'm a little nervous at putting a placeholder in policy for a thing that doesn't yet exist.
Well, maybe the term doesn't yet exist, but the concept and the process, I mean, I'm that your current policies and practices would be that you're going to be engaging in recruitment, you're going to screen with considerations of diversity. Now, those may change, and so what you have in place today may change as you attempt to achieve greater diversity, or diversity in your pools, diversity in your interview panels. But just as with other policies in place, you have a general policy statement, and then the handbook or procedures are developed within those policy statements and then may change from time to time or change as you evolve. And so I think that by recognizing that you you don't have to call them SOPs at this point in time, but policies and practices, to make a statement that you expect that they will adhere to all policies and practices, or to diverse policies and practices, or diversity in hiring, or in employment actions, because it's not just hiring, it's promotions and so on. So if you make a general statement like that, then I don't think you're necessarily just looking to the future. You're making that statement that they do that, and then whatever policies they adopt now or are using now, and then those would evolve. And you wouldn't have to then delay enacting the policy, your policy statement, which is you need to strive to achieve diversity.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's okay to include a thing that doesn't yet exist. I like SOPs for a working name. If others have different opinions, I'm not married to it. And Dr. Keiser or anyone from your team, correct me if I'm wrong. I get the sense that being intentional about diversity is new to us, and we're trying new things out. I wouldn't quite call them our standardized practices yet. Like, we're trying out the reporting on the diversity of the candidate pool, the panels, the recruiting is very new, the position hasn't been filled yet. So just so I'm clear, it's okay from a legal perspective to put a placeholder for things that aren't fully fleshed out and then revisit them. And if yes, where do you recommend those ideas and budding practices are housed? Because, like, there's an employee handbook and everything is laid out and we kind of link to it. There's not, that I'm aware of, kind of a home base for the things that we're pursuing. So, one, I like referencing it. And two, where do you recommend those things are housed?
Where what things are housed?
The new things that we're starting, like the recruitment. Eventually, those are going to be practices. The having a diverse candidate pool, the input, those things are new to us. Where do we document that and house it?
I would say that you would be developing, administration would be developing, as you've called them, SOPs. I mean, would be developing and memorializing the processes that they're using. And so your policy statement would not be a place, I don't see it as a placeholder, because what you're saying, and that's why I added in the next paragraph where it says, we will do this, we will strive to do this, because you don't currently have that. So, but you're working toward it. And so when you say we will strive or continually work to have staff that reflects the racial and cultural diversity of our community and our student body, that's a statement of diversity that gives direction to administration that they need to be working on processes and procedures that will achieve that goal, that will fulfill that policy statement. And without adopting all of the policies or all of these practices or procedures into your policy, you're giving direction to administration on this is where you're supposed to be heading as it relates to diversity.
And I would add, Attorney Love, and to address, I believe, the question you're asking, Board Member Levy, about what these are and where they're housed. So, standard operating procedures, or sometimes referred to as administrative regulations, I would see that as being all housed within board docs. So you would have a hierarchy. Policy is the law of the land. Administrative regs or standard operating procedures, however we want to call them, become the operational house derived from policy, and things like our employee handbook and all of that can all be housed within board docs. So that way, it's a one-stop. When we think about policies, when we think about practices, when we think about procedures, we all think board docs, and that is the one place where we house everything. So that way, when they're updated, when they're reviewed, and so forth, we have a one-stop shop.
Sounds good.
Did you say something, Board Member Levy? Or were you?
Yeah, I have some feedback on the next paragraph, but I didn't want to put anyone forward before we were all prepared to do that.
I'm good.
Okay, perfect. So here's my concern. I am concerned if we put strive or continually work to, that we're giving ourselves an out. And I am completely fine. In fact, I welcome the tension of this is what we say we will do. And if we are not doing it, it's very clear that additional action needs to take place. But if we say we'll strive to do something, how will we ever know if additional action needs to take place? Because doing something or not, you know if it was done. But striving, I could say, well, I'm striving, and no one could prove otherwise.
Board Member Levy, don't you think, though, that the proof is in the pudding? Because when we do our quarterly reports, it would be pretty evident if we're not doing, or excuse me, if the administration isn't doing what the board policy says?
No, and here is, I appreciate the question. Here is why. If diversity is at 2% of our staff and our population is at 66%, if we're going to reflect, we know what that goal is. But if we're at 4% and we say we're striving, then who can say, well, you need to do this, this, and this? Well, no, I don't, because I'm striving. It makes it very vague as to what is the next step. If we have a clear defined goal, anything less than that goal clearly indicates we have work to do.
So then who's going to lay out those goals? I mean, are we going to put out specific benchmarks that we're going to say, okay, we have to reach this number by this date, or the consequences will be delivered? I guess that's,
I don't necessarily see it by a day, and I just threw that number out. Let's say our staff is at 10% diversity, our student population is at 66%. So I don't think it is realistic to say if our staff doesn't reflect our student body within 2 years, then these are the consequences. But if we don't have a clearly defined goal, like this is our goal, then it's difficult to say what additional work needs to be done. If you don't know what it takes to get an A, it's hard to get it, and it's hard to know if you didn't get it. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. I just look at it and say, okay, if you say a clearly defined goal, but a clearly defined goal is going to have numbers out there and dates. Otherwise, how are you going to know if you're going to reach that mark? And if we're not going to go according to that, I understand where you're coming from, and I think that it's all we're headed in the right direction. Perhaps we're just coming at it two different directions or two different ways. I think that, the striving, I would agree. I mean, we need to always strive, and I think that the proof is in the pudding. We have to be looking at, okay, but to put out numbers there's a lot of unforeseen circumstances that we could be setting ourselves up for failure that we have no control over.
Let me suggest an alternative based on this discussion. What if we say our goal is to have a staff that reflects the racial and cultural diversity, etc.? So instead of strive to or continually work, we say our goal is this.
And that's what I was going to, I couldn't get to my button fast enough, Attorney Love, but I totally understand where Board Member Levy's coming from by establishing a firm, clear target that we're trying to achieve with the we will. Is there a way that we can term it so that we have a very clear goal that this is what we are accessing and recognizing that we're not there yet? Is that, am I paraphrasing that correctly?
So I have a question. If we don't change anything, the policy as it stands is we will have a staff that reflects the racial and cultural diversity of our community, and then it goes on. Why do we need to change that?
From a legal standpoint, you're stating that you will have this staff, but you don't. And you're taking steps to achieve that result. And over time, I mean, as your community composition changes, you're going to try to change your staffing composition, but you can't do that immediately because you have to wait till positions open up, and then you have to look for qualified candidates. And so from a legal standpoint, when you look at this and say, we will have this, the reality is, but you don't. And so aren't you already violating the policy that you've adopted because you don't have what you've said you will have?
Yes, we are. What are the legal consequences for doing that, if any?
Well, and there may not be, I mean, someone may come forward and say, you've said that you're going to have this representation in your workforce that's equal to the community, and you don't. Therefore, you're discriminating against me because you've said you will do this. Now, will they prevail on that argument? Probably not, as long as you're doing all the other things, taking your affirmative action steps. But from a legal standpoint, I mean, looking, and we wordsmith, so you can blame me. This is just my, I don't like when you say this is what exists when it doesn't. And it's what you want to capture this is your goal, is to have that. It's not what's currently existing. That's your goal. It's what you're working towards. It's what you've looked at establishing new policies.
So I guess my final comment on this, and I will yield the floor, is my preference is we will, because I think we should have that constant reminder that we're not there. If that is not supported by my other two colleagues on the committee, my second choice will be continually work to, Dr. Kieser, thank you for proposing that, because that means that wherever we are, we're always going to work. Because strive to, that seems more vague to me and makes me less comfortable.
I'm fine with continually work toward or to.
I am as well. So where does that put us in this overall policy at this point then?
Okay, so then, I mean, if we're done with discussing that paragraph, that moves us down to the district compliance officers. That's a term that comes from Title IX. But there's a question of who's eligible to serve as a compliance officer. Generally, it's someone in human resources, someone who has experience and education in Title IX, Title VII, discrimination laws generally, and also has experience in conducting employment-related investigations.
The suggestion of, thank you, Attorney Love. The suggestion of putting the Title IX compliance officer allows us, we have to, in that policy, identify an individual, and that individual is Ms. Williams. So by doing this, it creates a situation in which this always points to we have to designate by law the compliance officer for Title IX, and that person will also be the person to be the compliance officer for this policy.
Correct. But you don't want to incorporate, put that name, and I know in the past, sometimes the names have been incorporated in the policies. You do need to provide that information, publish it at least annually, who the person is, so that people know who they would go to if they have or one who would be responsible for the enforcement. But if you include it in your policy, that means every time you have a personnel change in your compliance officer, you have to modify your policy.
So I have a couple of questions regarding that. Who would be the backup to this CO? And then secondly, is there any credentials or any certification that a person needs to have in order to be considered the CO of the district?
So there was training that was provided both to administration at the district and at the building level around investigations for Title IX. And then there was also training that was provided for the people who are conducting the investigation. So yes, there are multiple levels of training that our district council provided to the district for that. There's no credentialing, but there was training provided.
But that's for a group of people. That's not necessarily for the compliance officer.
Separate. There's general training on the entire law, and then there was also training provided for individuals as far as what their duties, roles, and responsibilities are for conducting an actual investigation.
Okay, so you're saying a group of people, but we're not specific to the. Oh, okay, forget it. No, that's fine. So, the backup question then. I mean, we have a compliance officer. Is there a
Ms. Williams? I forget if we've listed a backup. No.
Excuse me, I didn't catch that last bit. Board Member Levy, are you having difficulty hearing?
It goes in and out. Sometimes it's very clear. Sometimes it's muffled.
Okay, thank you. Just an FYI in the boardroom.
Okay. The question was, let me know if you heard this or not, is who is the backup to the compliance officer? And the answer was there is none at this point.
Can that be remedied with just training a backup? And
Yes, we can definitely assign a backup to the compliance officer. And then in the situation where you don't want to have a person be the investigator of someone who they directly report to, so in the event where it would be the superintendent, the board president and district council would take over exactly who would do the investigation in that situation. I believe there was a question later on about that.
Other committee members have questions or comments? Okay, proceed on.
Okay, so the next change is in discrimination. The law requires that policies be available or disseminated, and we recognize in the policy that there will be proper notice and I recommend that you add that they're disseminated as required by law. So the compliance officer will know how they have to be disseminated, either in policy or sent home to the parents or posted on bulletin boards. But I think we want to recognize that they'll be complying with the law and disseminating this information. And then the next section is where this question comes up as, what happens if the person being discriminated against is the superintendent, or what happens if the superintendent is the person being accused of misconduct? And the policy says that complaints can be brought to anyone. I mean, you can go to a supervisor, you can go to a board member, but whoever you report to will then notify the compliance officer. And later in the policy, it specifically addresses in investigations that if the individual who is the subject of the complaint is the superintendent or a board member, it will be referred to the board's legal counsel, who will then assume the role of the compliance officer and either direct someone to conduct that investigation or conduct that investigation themselves.
May I jump in for clarification, Attorney Love?
Certainly.
So when you were speaking, you mentioned if the person was the superintendent or a board member, but what I'm reading under the header of reports and complaints of unlawful discrimination or retaliation does not include, I'm looking at what's in blue, just specifically talks to the superintendent. I think it might be appropriate to include board members and how that will be handled. But if there was an issue with the superintendent, would that be handled by the board, or would that be handled by legal counsel for the district, or both working together?
According to the policy right now, as drafted, under investigations, it will be handled by the board's legal counsel.
Okay, and then to the second point, does the board need to be included in this for reports and complaints? Because in the blue, it just references the superintendent.
Yeah, that was just a question, I think. That's not part of the policy, what's in blue.
Okay.
Yeah, that was just a question that was raised by someone. So that won't be included.
But,
and
I think it's a good point. Should the board be included, or is there a reason that we are, hopefully there will never be a board member involved in any of this, but is there a reason that we're intentionally left out? And if no, should we be included?
Okay, you're not left out in terms of being a harasser. This policy, though, addresses employees. You could certainly expand it to include, if you chose, to have board members be able to file complaints of harassment and have them investigated, but typically that would not be your typical process. That would be an unusual policy to have board members bring harassment or discrimination complaints under your employee harassment policy.
No, perfect. And thank you for bringing me back to the center of employees. That makes perfect sense.
Okay. So then if we move down, we've got complaints of unlawful discrimination or retaliation by an employee will be accepted by any member of the school district community. So in other words, the law says that you want to have a policy that invites people who are victims or believe they are victims of discrimination or harassment to bring complaints forward and to be an appropriate and compliant policy, you have to allow multiple avenues of complaint. So that's why this says you can bring your complaint to anyone in the community, the school district community, but ultimately then it gets referred to the compliance officer, who then moves forward with the investigation. Let's see. We've eliminated, there was a provision in here you'll see in the last paragraph before investigation that says that unlawful discrimination or retaliation is expected to report that conduct to a manager. And it said they're expected to intervene to stop the misconduct unless the circumstances make such intervention dangerous, in which case the staff member should immediately notify other board employees and or local law enforcement officials. The way the process should work is you get a complaint. If a supervisor sees conduct happening that they can stop, they should stop it at that point in time, but then they immediately report it to the compliance officer, who then will make decisions as to what appropriate steps someone should take. To intervene immediately, while that may happen, it should be done in conjunction with the report to the compliance officer. And so we don't want to encourage people to engage in interacting inappropriately. So that's why that was taken out. But then we do recognize they should take appropriate steps to stop any misconduct that they see happening.
Attorney Love, may I interject just for clarification?
Sure.
If memory serves me correctly, we usually use like supervisor as the language throughout the document. Should we be consistent with that, or is manager okay? Everyone will understand what manager means.
From a legal perspective, it doesn't matter. It's a matter of if you have a preference for.
Okay. Dr. Kieser, like, and other committee members, I think might be like building leadership or admin, or I just want to make sure that our language is consistent throughout our policies. But what are the opinions of others?
I would agree with you, Board Member Levy, that we should make sure that we use consistent language throughout our policy. So we'll make sure that changes are in alignment.
Just for my 2 cents, I personally like supervisor.
I'm fine with either of those, but yes, if we can be consistent, that would be, I think, appropriate. That way it creates less confusion. Okay, so where are we at now? Are we at the end of this? Or?
So now the next comment is down in the paragraph that talks about the conclusion of the investigation. And there's the investigator may consult with the board's legal counsel before finalizing the report to the superintendent. And that's the compliance officer who's doing the investigation. The notation is to change may to must. And I think the reason it says may is there may be some investigations that would not require consulting with legal counsel before finalizing a report, depending on the circumstances. And I think that's why it said may, that you don't mandate legal consultation on every investigation that takes place.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, at least in my short tenure in the investigations that I've been privy to, we've consulted legal counsel. So must actually is a more accurate term, because we've been consistently working with legal counsel.
So my only question for clarification, because I put that note in there, my initial thought is must, just because any complaint, I just want to make sure that it's being handled appropriately. And that's still my preference, but just to make sure I have a clear understanding, if we changed it from instead of may to must as necessary, is there kind of some kind of like decision tree, for lack of a better phrasing, of when you have to consult legal and when you don't? And is that clearly defined somewhere for the compliance officer?
Well, from a legal standpoint, as legal counsel, I would say it's always a good idea to consult when you're doing an investigation, to review the investigation, make sure it's been complete, that your proposed conclusions or recommendations are legally compliant. But there may be times when you do an investigation. So I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say you have an employee who has been telling inappropriate jokes, and someone was offended by it. And you have your investigator do the investigation, and it's very straightforward that, yes, the employee admitted they told these jokes, and yes, those jokes were inappropriate. You may decide that they have violated the policy. And in terms of finalizing the report to the superintendent as to what occurred, the investigator doesn't feel they have to consult any further. There aren't any questions about whether the law has been violated or the policy has been violated, not the law, but whether the policy has been violated at that point. They may feel more comfortable. So your suggestion of as necessary, they may feel more comfortable doing it. And maybe at that point, the investigator wouldn't have to consult. You wouldn't want to mandate it. But you could mandate it. There's, nothing wrong. Legally you don't have to, but it's always before you finalize things. And at that point, so the investigator is preparing a report for the superintendent. And then the superintendent is going to review that report and determine whether more information is needed, whether additional investigation is needed. And then prepare a final written decision. Was there a violation or not? It might be more appropriate that the legal consultation occurs at that point in time.
No, I appreciate that, and I agree with what you just said. And coming out of what we have been through, I would rather err on the side of caution and say it must be. If something rises to the level of an investigation being needed, I would be most comfortable with it being cleared by legal. But I do like that would come at the step, not necessarily of the CO, but as the superintendent. I think that's wholly appropriate.
Can you repeat that last part? I didn't get all of the...
Are you talking to me or
Yes,
Attorney Love?
yes.
Oh, okay. What I said was, I thanked Attorney Love, and I think coming out of what we are coming out of as a district, I would rather err on the side of cautious and dotting the T's, crossing the T's and dotting the I's. If something rises to the level of an investigation being needed, I want a legal sign off on that to make sure everything was handled properly. But I do agree that probably shouldn't happen at the level of the CO. But once the superintendent does the final review, that's when the legal sign-off should happen, not before it gets to the superintendent, because the superintendent may have additional questions.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine with that as well. Board Member Jacobs, do you have any comments?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay. Next area of questions, I think Kim's down a couple of paragraphs down from there.
So that question, if the superintendent says that more information is needed or additional investigation is needed, it says, is the CO doing the additional investigation? I would say that yes, because the superintendent is saying, I need more. So give it back to the investigator, have them finalize it. They would then reasonably, they would modify their report prepare an addendum to their initial report that here's the information that you asked for. And then with that information, the superintendent prepares a final written decision. They don't prepare the report. They just say, these are the extra things I need. The CO would go back in and finish it, and then would provide whatever additional information was requested, and then the superintendent would make the final decision.
Any comments from committee members? Okay.
All right, so then the next section, oops, I went too far, sorry. What impact does this have? The investigation's concluded, the superintendent issues a final decision, then notifies the complainant that either the complaint was sustained, and appropriate remedial action was implemented, or the complaint was not sustained. And then the respondent, the accused, is notified in accordance with any discipline policy if there is discipline to be issued. And it has no impact on the complainant's legal rights, other than where you have a legitimate and reasonable investigation process, complaint and investigation process, the employee is expected to adhere to that or take advantage of that process before taking any other action externally. But it doesn't have any impact on, your decision doesn't, if you decide that it's not sustained, that doesn't mean that the complainant can't go to the state or federal agencies to file a complaint. It has no impact on their rights at all. And then we have confidentiality. The question is, will the complainant and respondent have access to materials gathered in the investigation? Generally, and this depends on whether it is a Title IX investigation, because Title IX investigations are much more open in terms of access to investigation materials. generally, when you're doing an employment investigation, because of employee privacy rights, the investigation materials are not available or open to either the complainant or respondent. They're part of the investigation file. They're confidential.
Okay, hearing no comments.
And that's it, I think, is it?
No, we
or
have
do
one
we have
more.
more? Oh, one more. Appeal process. There is no appeal process of the findings of an investigation, except to the extent that an employee is disciplined as a result of having violated the policy. And then it would be whatever your appeal process, your grievance process is for that employee who has been disciplined. But there's no appeal process for someone who's filed a complaint if they don't like the outcome. Essentially, their appeal is to go to an external agency to file their complaint if they don't feel it was handled appropriately internally.
Okay, and then I think there was one on the very last.
Very bottom, it
Yeah.
says, would be helpful to clarify which programs are specifically governed by. We could do that. I don't have that in my head right now, but I apologize. But identifying all federal programs or laws or regulations that provide for different complaint process, we can identify those.
Okay. Should we move approval on this, or if the committee is ready for this without that information, or should we?
I just have a general question. Again, thank you so much, Attorney Love, for walking us through this and for answering all the questions, etc. Here is my concern. I'm totally comfortable with what we've agreed to in committee, and I'm slightly uncomfortable with not. So for other board members that weren't able to participate in this conversation, we are asking them to approve what we agreed to without being able to read it. And I know we've done this in the past, but I just want to request input. Is there a better way to do that? So the changes that we made and the three of us think are great, that the rest of our colleagues have an opportunity to digest it before they vote to approve it as well.
Board Member Levy, I appreciate where you're coming from, and I understand that. However, I believe the purpose, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, the purpose of us doing the committees in this manner was that the board as a whole then would have faith in the people that were on the committee and trust and approve it once it went to the full board. So I don't know if this one time with this one policy, if that would be appropriate. I'm just throwing that out there for discussion.
No, and I appreciate that feedback, and I probably would be more clear. In general, like, I'm comfortable with it because I sat in on it and did the work. If I was another board member, I would be somewhat uncomfortable, and not just this specific policy, but all policy that's adjusted in committee and goes straight to the full board. So again, not this specific policy, but all of them, we're asking them to approve something that they haven't even read. And I think it's great to trust your colleagues, et cetera. But again, we're asking them to approve something that we know they probably haven't read if they didn't have time to sit in on this committee. So just a larger discussion to have.
And I would agree to that. I think perhaps, you know, with the new appointments and whatnot tonight, maybe that would be a good, I'm not saying tonight because it's not on the agenda, of course, but going forward, perhaps we need to revisit committees and their purposes. Is that kind of along the lines of what you're thinking?
It is, and I'm processing it as I'm bringing it up to you. This might be better served to have this as one of our board norms, that if the committee does make adjustments in policies, that there is a moment for our colleagues to read through their adjustments. So it's not 3 people making a decision for 7, it's 7 people making a decision for 7. Thanks for indulging me.
Yeah, no problem.
And actually, as part of our conversation this evening around committee structures at the full board, I believe I have a solution for that. So more to come.
I certainly understand the whole conversation here and respect that as well. I think that I would tend to agree the committee structure is set up in a way that hopefully not all board members have to read every document that's coming through, and there is trust that's built into the board as a whole. I think that if there is concerns about what the practice is going forward, that's when items can be or should be pulled off of the agenda and not just channeled through the consent agenda. But perhaps I think hopefully we'll alleviate some of these concerns going forward. So, okay, do we have a motion for this policy?
I move to recommend to the full Board of Education the approval of the revisions and layover for policy 511, affirmative action and equal opportunity employment, for the first reading.
A second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We've had quite a bit of discussion. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none.
I'd just like to make the comment that we have been discussing this for some time, which I think we needed to do. And I feel good that we've done our due diligence on it because it's an extremely important policy. And thank you, Attorney Love, once again for all of your valuable input.
You're welcome.
Okay. We have, let's see. So we have a motion to recommend to the full Board of Education approval of the revisions and layovers of policy 511, affirmative action and equal opportunity employment, for the first reading. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. So now we're going to move on to, we have a very short period of time, and I know these are important to get through, but hopefully they'll be streamlined and fast. We have policy 662.3, fund balance. We have Ms. Armstrong here to present.
Yes, and I was going to say, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Armstrong. These are all recommendations that are coming out of our annual audit, and so she'll walk us through the proposed changes as recommended from our audit.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to get to these policies and the work that we've been doing in this committee. The majority in the first policy on fund balance are corrections of some typos that just needed to be done. However, the significant difference in what we're recommending has actually come to committee multiple times, including last year after our audit, in that our policy states that the goal of the district is to have a cash fund balance between 14 to 25%, and we're looking for at least an 18% of anticipated general expenses from the previous year. That becomes a problematic situation when we had revenue limit energy exemptions of $5.5 million. And now with CARES funding and our Title I funding, what the purpose with grants is that those, if you don't have those grant dollars, those dollars would go away, or revenue energy exemptions will go away. By our policy, we need to keep 18% of those one-time expenditures in our fund balance. We would not necessarily have those expenses again after the projects were complete or the grant was revoked. So to align our fund balance policy to only incorporate inclusion to that 18% of our subsequent fiscal year expenditures with the exclusion of grant expenditures or one-time exemptions from that process. So I am asking for the board to approve the change in our policy to take out the unrestricted or unassigned comments and also exclude those grant expenditures or one-time exemptions.
Okay. So once again, primarily it's just a cleanup of the policy itself, but then the major revision is the exclusive of grants, expenditures, and one-time exemptions or special expenditures. Comments or questions from committee members?
I have a question for Ms. Armstrong. Do you have an idea of, on average, okay, so let me back up. Every year we have grants. We just can't kind of bank on what that total of grants will be, and it fluctuates, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Would it be valuable to, and I get what you're saying about eliminating unrestricted, so we're not committed to a specific year's amount, but would it be valuable to look at like a 5-year average of what our grant intakes are, not tied to 1 year, so that would kind of alleviate the fluctuation, but do set aside a portion of that kind of consistent grant amount and incorporate that in our fund balance? Would there be benefit to having a rolling average over a set period of years and setting aside money that corresponds to that number?
That's a great question, and I can see where that could potentially be beneficial. However, as the district is experiencing declining enrollment, that directly impacts our grant funding under Title I and Title III. So to use a 5-year average, we're going to be at a higher rate necessarily. And the essence of your grants funds is if those grant funds go away, we're not able to supplant those funds, and they have to be sustainable. So, you know, having us be able to budget and account for grant funds when the reality is the fact that those grant programs will probably either have to be absorbed as an initiative in the district operational budget as a whole, or they will have to be reduced to meet the needs of what our grant entitlement is. Does that answer your question?
It does, and it raises a new one. What do you think about if we, instead of changing this, we suspended that portion of the policy for, let's say, a year, and then we check back in, because then we will be clear on what the implications are of removing that criteria of having unrestricted fund balance. And I think that would make, for me, I'll just speak for me, that would assist me in making a better informed decision about whether that should be permanently eliminated or not, because it may strengthen the very argument, or not argument, the very position that you presented this evening.
Yep, and I would understand that. However, in our audit, we have to specify our specific policy language on fund balance. Now, we could do that, and as we report our financials every month, we report expenditures with grants and without grants separately, so you can see the true operating budget. We can add to those reports what that percentage of our fund balance is and report that out. You know, I guess in essence, I'm saying we can change this policy next year if we find it doesn't work. But on the recommendations from our auditors, it really should just be our operating expenses exclusionary of this, because they have to try to back things out and put them back in when they're doing our audited financial reports, because our policy states we have to include those. So when we had the RLEE, and now we're looking at quite a bit of CARES funding coming in, we are going to be out of compliance, and our financial reports will reflect that the district is out of compliance unless we change this policy. And I personally would like to not have us out of compliance with our policy on fund balance.
No, absolutely. So just to be clear, what I'm recommending is that, and Attorney Love, let me know if I'm recommending something that's not possible, that we suspend that portion of our policy. We omit that word, but I say suspend it because in a year it will revert back unless we do something. If we just omit it, then we have to go in and then kind of remember to do that check and decide if we need it or not. So for me, and others chime in if you're viewing this differently, that's our stopgap. That's our alarm. We are going to put it the way you're recommending it for a year and then get tangible feedback to this is how this impacts it. And yep, we should definitely permanently eliminate this, or no, we should go back to having this as unrestricted. Attorney Love, is what I'm proposing legally feasible?
I mean, legally, you can do that. You could say that you're adopting a policy that excludes this language for 1 year, basically a sunset clause that we're going to adopt this, but it goes away in 1 year. I'm not sure whether that will satisfy the auditor's concerns.
And I don't know if it would help in that situation. I am more than willing to put this on the agenda items for us to have a discussion when we present the final audit, to have the discussion on what, if this worked for us, and have the auditor speak to that at our next audit presentation, hopefully in November, December timeframe, and make those decisions based on bringing this policy back to the board to say, is this, it's just a review. Do we want to add it back in, or do we want to keep it out?
So just my preference, and I will yield to whoever else on the committee wants to chime in. I like the idea of suspending it because it mandates that it can't fall through the cracks. Like if it's suspended, it reverts back unless we address this. So that my preference would be to suspend it and to run through a real life scenario of what you're talking about and then reevaluate and decide how we want to move forward.
Okay, for clarification.
If I could suggest another way to approach that is that you make this change, but then you incorporate language in the policy that this policy will be reviewed on an annual basis, or will be reviewed again December or November, December of 2021, so that within the policy you have the mandate of review rather than suspending it and have it automatically go back to the way it was. If you adopt this change now, then you've got a policy statement that's compliant with what the auditors have suggested, but then you've also got this built into the policy, the review that you're looking for.
I like that. The only thing that I would add is that we're very specific about what portion would be reviewed, because if we have a different composition on this committee, they could review it and completely miss the reason why we wanted it reviewed. So the omission of unrestricted fund balance is the specific thing that will be reviewed annually or every 2 years, et cetera. I like that.
Thank you, Attorney Love. That does make a lot of sense.
Committee Member Jacobs, any comments?
No, I like what was just discussed.
Yes, I would agree as well. I like the idea of going that route as well. So seeing as this is the only change, other than the typos and the adjustments in the policy itself, and understanding what was presented there, do we have a motion?
Before we get to motion, Attorney Love, could you recommend the language that needs to go so we know what we're voting on?
Sure. Calling on me to do some wordsmithing. I mean, I think the policy as it's been drafted with the changes, and then just add a provision at the end that says I have to go back and look at the policy. What
unrestricted fund balance and general fund. So we want to remove unrestricted and then also remove the word unassigned from resources, but something about the replacement of unrestricted fund balance and unassigned resources will be reviewed on an annual basis or every 2 years.
And I think that's fine. That is fine. That language, just as you said, because it identifies exactly what's going to be reviewed.
One suggestion I would make is if we're going to do this, I would have fears of doing it every other year, that it's going to get lost in the shuffle and you're going to have turnover of board, and there's going to be probably 2 or 3 people that won't have a clue as far as what would be going on. So I would have it be annually.
I would agree.
And if I could make a suggestion again, the only question is it working? Is the removal of this language working? And so if you make it, a time certain that you're going to review it again, in 2022, or you change the policy, you're going to review it again in July of 2022, then you've got a date certain and you're not tying yourself to the future. You make a decision at that point, yeah, this is working, we don't need to worry about re-implementing the language. We're just going to leave the policy as it is, and then you don't need to review it again. If you decide, well, we're not quite sure, then you either put the language back in or you say you're going to review it in July of 2023. Rather than making it an annual thing, you'll be able to make a decision as to whether to leave it out in perpetuity.
Okay. Ms. Shope, do you have the motion there?
I have some language, but I'm not 100% sure it was exactly as it was stated. So I can read what I have.
Please do.
And I'm not sure now with what Attorney Love said in the annual basis, what I'm supposed to put there. So what I have is the elimination of unrestricted fund balance and unassigned resources in the total fund balance will be reviewed, and I had on an annual basis.
Are we okay with that as committee?
I am. I think annual keeps it simple.
All right.
I like it.
Okay. So we have a motion. I don't think we had a second.
I second.
Okay, and I have one clarification. I put that at the end of the paragraph where unrestricted and unassigned are crossed off. Is that where you want it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Technically, I think we have a motion, so we may need to back up a little bit.
Board Member Levy, would you like to make a motion?
I'd love to. So I recommend that we use the revisions that Secretary Shope just read and pass policy 662.3 fund balance to the full board for first reading.
I will second that.
Okay. Now that we have an official motion and a second, I think we've discussed this enough at this point. If there's all those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay. Board Member Levy, did you vote on that? Is she frozen?
If that was directed to us at home, it was very muffled. I couldn't understand it.
I
Sorry.
couldn't either.
I did, Board Member Levy, I didn't know if I heard you vote or not. I just wanted to make sure that,
Oh, thank you. Yes, aye.
okay, thank you. And so motion carries. So we'll proceed on. We are going to, these last two policies are kind of critical, correct, to get through?
Yeah.
So we're going to
And
push,
one is going to be less than
okay.
a minute,
let's-
I promise.
Let's hope for that. So we're going to delay things a little bit here, just so that the public knows that the regular board meeting will not begin on time. So let's proceed forward. Policy 672 for purchasing.
Okay. The policy for 672, the only changes and revisions, which normally would be just done as an overlay and not require approval, but I did a correction to the title of the Executive Director of Business, HR, and Operations from Business Services, and I wanted to remove payment options that we no longer use. So we do not utilize EasyNet Pay, and the district does not have petty cash accounts. So I wanted to make those revisions to the policy so that it is accurate of our processes right now.
Okay, any comments, questions from board members? We're not going to include Bitcoin in that? I'm just kidding. Okay. All right, hearing no questions or comments, do we have a motion?
I move approval of policy 672, purchasing, and lay over to the full board for approval.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion on this policy? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Moving on to policy 672.1, purchasing and bidding requirements.
Okay, now I can't promise this one will take less than a minute. So in response to our audit and continuing requests from our audit services, this has been brought forward multiple times by both Schenck and Clifton Larson, who has been our auditing firms for the last 3 years, in that our purchasing thresholds are extremely low for the district in requiring the bidding and the board approval. And so we want to make sure that we continue to offer competitive bidding and awarding contracts, not taking away any of that aspect, but we wanted to raise limits of what actually had to come to the board for the actual approval. There is still notification. So the first revision that we have in the general provisions is to change the committee that it would be reporting to and the dollar amounts to $50,000 to $100,000. That $100,000 is representative of 0.1% of the district operating expense. Currently, we are having to take things for full board approval for 0.02% of our budget. And that is tying up a lot of time and resources to get those approved. Our budget is quite large, and the board approves a budget. So they've allocated and approved where we've allocated our money and given the district the authority to spend that money. I want to be clear that by doing any of the revisions proposed in this policy of changing those thresholds,